Rome did not always kill its enemies. Execution created martyrs. Martyrs created memory. Memory created resistance. So the state chose something else. Erasure. Not death, removal. A man could still breathe, but his life would no longer exist. In the Roman world, power was legal before it was violent. The Republic spoke in laws. The empire whispered through decrees. Authority did not begin with swords. It began with documents. The process was bureaucratic, calm, recorded. A political enemy was first named, not accused, defined. Senators gathered in enclosed chambers, marble floors beneath their feet, wax tablets in their hands, witnesses seated in silence. Words were spoken carefully. Words mattered. Once named, a man was no longer a citizen. He was a condition. Roman law allowed this. A declaration without trial, a vote without defense. No blood was required. The state did not need to kill him. It needed to isolate him. Isolation was legal, orderly, silent. Confiscation followed. Clerks entered villas with ledgers. They counted land. They counted slaves. They counted silver. Everything was recorded. Nothing was argued. Property was not taken as punishment. It was taken as correction. A Roman without property had no voice, no standing, no allies. Social gravity shifted immediately. Clients withdrew. Friends reduced contact. Doors closed quietly. Then came exile. Not banishment to wilderness, relocation. A man was ordered to leave Rome, Italy, sometimes the entire Mediterranean. No escort, no protection. Maps were unrolled in council rooms, borders marked with ink. The destination was chosen for silence. A Greek island, a provincial town, a place where letters traveled slowly. Exile was not freedom, it was disappearance. The man was alive, but unreachable. The system moved forward without him. No announcement followed. No explanation was required. Rome continued. The state did not rely on death to remove its enemies. Death created attention. Attention created questions. Questions created instability. Rome preferred certainty. Isolation provided that certainty. Once a man was named, the machinery continued. Confiscation was not sudden, it was systematic. Clerks arrived without warning, not soldiers, not guards. Men with writing tools, men trained to record. They entered villas calmly. They opened ledgers. They asked for documents. Land was measured, boundaries confirmed, titles reviewed. Nothing was seized in anger. Everything was taken in order. Slaves were counted, not as people, as property. Silver was weighed, coins stacked, totals confirmed. Each entry was written carefully. There was no argument. Roman law did not invite protest. It assumed compliance. Property was not removed as revenge. It was removed as correction. Correction restored balance. Without property, a Roman lost position. Status weakened first. Influence followed. Clients stopped visiting. Invitations ended. Voices that once mattered became irrelevant. A man still walked the streets, but he was no longer seen. His name remained, but it carried no weight. Isolation deepened. Then came formal relocation. Exile was presented as procedure. A notice was delivered, sealed, stamped. There was no escort. There was no protection. The man was expected to leave on his own. Maps were consulted in council rooms, not to decide justice, to decide distance. Distance reduced communication. Distance reduced memory. Destinations were chosen carefully, not hostile places, quiet ones. Greek islands with limited traffic, provincial towns with slow correspondence, places where letters took weeks, sometimes months. Exile was not freedom, it was managed absence. The man lived, but Rome did not hear him. Back in the city, records were adjusted. Public lists were reviewed. Clerks compared older entries with new instructions. Names were removed, not crossed out violently, corrected. Stone inscriptions were altered. Chisels worked slowly. Dust fell quietly. Faces on statues remained untouched. Only names disappeared. History was edited without announcement. Witnesses observed. They understood the lesson. Identity existed only by permission. Family members felt the effect next, not through force, through law. Guardians were reassigned, inheritance delayed, legal authority shifted. Marriage contracts were revisited, dowries frozen. No charges were filed, no punishments declared, only adjustments. The family adapted. They reduced visibility. They avoided association. Distance became protection. Rome never explained these actions. It did not need to. The process was visible, predictable, understood. Everyone learned where power lived, not in violence, in procedure. Exile was not an emotional decision. It was administrative. Once a man lost position and property, distance completed the process. Removal from Rome was essential. Presence created memory. Memory created influence. Rome reduced both. The order to leave was delivered plainly. No accusations, no explanations. A sealed document, a fixed timeline. The man was expected to comply. There was no escort provided. Protection was unnecessary. Resistance was unlikely. Maps were consulted long before the order was written, not to decide guilt, to decide isolation. Distance was calculated. Routes were chosen. Destinations evaluated. Communication speed mattered. Places with slow correspondence were preferred. Greek islands with limited traffic. Provincial towns outside major trade routes. Locations where letters arrived late, if they arrived at all. Exile was framed as relocation, not imprisonment, not punishment, a legal adjustment. The man traveled alone, not as a prisoner, as an individual without protection. That distinction mattered. Rome did not appear violent, it appeared orderly. Arrival did not bring relief. Local officials had already been informed, not through public notice, through quiet instruction. Hospitality was limited, protection absent, status unrecognized. The exile lived, but without context, without authority, without audience. Letters were written. Some were sent. Few were answered. Weeks passed, then months. Silence increased. Back in Rome, the absence normalized. Meetings continued. Votes proceeded. Decisions were made. No reference to the missing man. No concern expressed. The system trained participants to move forward. Attention was redirected. New patrons emerged. New alliances formed. Space was filled quickly. This was intentional. Vacuum created instability. Replacement created continuity. Families adapted gradually. They adjusted finances. They reduced visibility. They avoided mention. Children learned not to ask questions. Names were spoken less frequently. Then, not at all. Memory required reinforcement. Rome provided none. Provincial governors learned the lesson. Exile was efficient. It required no guards, no prisons, no executions. It relied on cooperation. Cooperation was produced by predictability. Everyone understood the cost of resistance. Distance made resistance impractical. An isolated man could not organize, could not communicate effectively, could not inspire. Time worked for the state. Exiles aged. Health declined. Relevance faded. Rome waited. There was no urgency, no need for finality. The man's existence no longer mattered. What mattered was the example. Witnesses observed the sequence. They recognized the pattern. They adjusted behavior accordingly. Silence became instinct. Movement became cautious. Speech became measured. Exile was not about removal from land. It was removal from history. Rome mastered that technique. It required patience, and patience was abundant. The state did not hurry. It did not need to.
After exile, the Roman system did not pause. Removal from the city was only one layer of control. The deeper task was correction of memory. Presence could be eliminated physically, but records preserved influence. Influence had to be dismantled. Administrative review followed automatically. Clerks returned to archives. Rows of wax tablets, scrolls tied with cord, stone lists displayed in public spaces. They worked methodically. Speed produced errors. Errors weakened authority. Accuracy mattered more than urgency. Old entries were examined carefully. Names compared against instructions. Dates verified. Corrections approved through routine procedure. This was not destruction, it was revision. Public registers were altered first. Civic rolls shortened. Tax records adjusted. Legal references updated. A missing name reshaped reality. Courts continued without interruption. Judges entered as scheduled. Scribes wrote steadily. Cases unrelated to the erased individual proceeded. The system demonstrated continuity. Absence did not disrupt order. In public life, the effects became visible. A chair remained empty during meetings. Discussion continued around it. No comment followed. Mention implied risk. Silence implied understanding. Statues were addressed next, not removed. Removal attracted attention. Adjustment avoided it. Stone cutters worked under supervision. Chisels moved slowly. Names were chipped away carefully. Dust settled on the floor. Faces remained untouched. Accomplishments appeared anonymous. The past was edited without announcement. Witnesses observed the process. They learned how authority shaped memory. A man's accomplishments could remain visible without being traceable. Credit dissolved. Ownership vanished. This was more effective than execution. Execution ended life. Revision ended relevance. Families experienced correction gradually, not through force, through law. Legal authority shifted. Guardianship reassigned. Inheritance delayed. Financial autonomy reduced. Marriage contracts reviewed again. Dowries frozen without appeal. Each step justified legally. Nothing appeared excessive. That restraint was intentional. Excess provoked resistance. Procedure created acceptance. In Roman culture, legality defined legitimacy. If law permitted action, discussion ended. The Senate did not debate cruelty. It debated order. Provincial administrators followed Rome's example. They monitored changes carefully. A correction in the capital required adjustment in the provinces. Local records were updated. Trade partners adapted quietly. Legal protections expired without notice. The empire synchronized erasure. Over time, patterns became familiar. Absence required no explanation. Explanation invited questions. Questions created instability. Predictability maintained control. Association became calculation. Speech became measured. Presence became strategic. This system did not rely on fear alone. It relied on comprehension. Everyone understood the sequence: naming, loss, distance, revision, silence. No deviation occurred. No appeal succeeded. Responsibility was distributed deliberately. Each official completed a small task. No single act appeared decisive. No individual appeared guilty. That diffusion protected authority. Power operated without a face. Control functioned without emotion. Rome did not announce dominance. It demonstrated it repeatedly, quietly, relentlessly.
After identity was corrected, the effects moved outward. The state did not stop with the individual. Isolation was contagious. Family members experienced the change quietly, not through violence, through law. Legal status shifted. Wives were reassigned guardians. Authority over households changed hands. This was presented as protection. It functioned as control. Women adapted quickly. They reduced visibility. They managed smaller resources. They avoided attention. Survival required adjustment. Sons felt the impact next. Inheritance rights weakened. Future expectations narrowed. Education changed direction. Careers once possible became inaccessible. No explanation was offered. Understanding was assumed. Daughters returned to legal dependence. Guardianship replaced autonomy. Marriage negotiations weakened. Dowries remained frozen. Prospects declined without announcement. All of this followed procedure. Nothing appeared punitive. That distinction mattered. Punishment invited sympathy. Procedure invited compliance. Marriage contracts were reviewed again. Clauses reinterpreted. Obligations suspended. Agreements adjusted. Clerks handled these changes routinely. They did not debate fairness. They recorded outcomes. Family members learned restraint. Questions created risk. Mention created association. Association created exposure. Distance became protection. Friends responded instinctively. Visits declined. Invitations stopped. Conversations shortened. Eye contact weakened. Social networks reorganized themselves. No instruction was required. The pattern was understood. Clients withdrew loyalty, not publicly, quietly. Economic ties dissolved. Support vanished without explanation. In Roman society, association carried consequence. Everyone calculated risk continuously. The family adjusted behavior accordingly. They reduced public presence. They avoided gatherings. They spoke carefully. They learned silence. The Senate never addressed these effects. There were no speeches, no justification offered. Order did not require explanation. Courts continued operations normally. Judges ruled on unrelated matters. Scribes wrote without interruption. The system demonstrated indifference. Indifference reinforced authority. Provincial societies observed Rome. They followed the example. Families adjusted behavior preemptively. Avoidance became instinct. Distance became policy. This was not terror, it was conditioning. People learned limits. They learned boundaries. They learned consequences without direct confrontation. Over time, this behavior normalized. Children grew up within it. They absorbed caution early. Memory softened. History simplified. The erased individual became abstract, a name without context, then no name at all. This was how stability was maintained, not by spectacle, by routine, by repetition, by silence. The system did not accelerate, it did not slow, it remained consistent. Consistency produced predictability. Predictability produced obedience. The family survived, but altered, reduced, contained. That outcome was acceptable. The state required order, not resolution. Rome did not pursue closure. It pursued continuity. Continuity was preserved, quietly. By this stage, the system did not feel active. It felt normal. That was its final form. Erasure did not require repetition. It required acceptance. Institutions adjusted permanently. The Senate adapted first. Debate shortened. Language softened. Risky topics were avoided instinctively. Votes accelerated. Efficiency replaced deliberation. No one asked why. Understanding was assumed. Courts reflected the change. Judges ruled within narrower boundaries. Precedent mattered more than argument. Scribes recorded outcomes carefully. Records became the authority. What was written defined reality. What was absent did not exist. Law was not broken, it was applied. That distinction preserved legitimacy. Political enemies were not described as criminals. They were treated as administrative errors. Errors were corrected quietly. Emperors refined the process further. They observed what worked. Execution produced instability. Erasure produced obedience. Orders became shorter. Delegation increased. Responsibility dispersed. No single decree appeared decisive. No single official appeared responsible. Authority became invisible. That invisibility protected it. The military adapted as well. Orders arrived sealed. Context was unnecessary. Compliance followed automatically. Soldiers enforced boundaries without understanding purpose. Understanding was irrelevant. Execution of instruction was sufficient. Bureaucracy replaced spectacle. Maps replaced speeches. Letters replaced commands. Power traveled through documents. Witnesses were everywhere, in councils, in courts, in households. They learned to observe without reacting. Reaction created attention. Attention created risk. Silence preserved safety. Over time, this behavior became instinct. People adjusted speech patterns. They calculated association. They managed presence carefully, not out of fear, out of habit. Habit was more reliable. Generations grew within the system. They did not remember alternatives. Stories changed, not heroic deaths, administrative disappearances, absence without explanation. History became procedural. Memory became selective. The empire benefited from this. Dissent lacked structure. Ideas lacked patrons. Resistance lacked coordination. An isolated individual could not inspire. A forgotten one could not be remembered. Time completed the work. Exiles aged. Families adapted. Records hardened. New officials replaced old ones. Continuity prevailed. Rome did not need to announce control. It demonstrated it daily, through routine, through paperwork, through silence. The system did not rely on terror. It relied on predictability. Predictability produced compliance. Compliance produced stability. That stability sustained power. The man remained alive, but irrelevant. His name absent. His past unmanaged. His future unnecessary. Rome did not always kill its enemies. It removed them from consequence, from memory, from history. Silence. Time completed what law began. The Roman system did not require urgency. It relied on duration. Once erasure was normalized, time carried the process forward. Exiles aged quietly. Health declined. Distance increased. Letters stopped. Silence hardened. Back in Rome, generations changed. New officials replaced old ones. New clerks entered archives. They learned procedures, not histories. Names absent from records were never questioned. Absence appeared natural. That was the final objective. Memory required maintenance. Rome denied it. Without repetition, memory faded. Stories shortened. Details disappeared. Context vanished. What remained was outline, then nothing. Public spaces reflected this shift. Monuments remained unchanged. Names missing went unnoticed. Citizens passed inscriptions daily without reading them. Familiarity erased curiosity. Routine dissolved attention. History became background. Education reinforced this. Young Romans learned structure. They memorized laws. They studied offices. They learned outcomes, not individuals. Political caution replaced ambition. Survival replaced expression. The system rewarded predictability. Risk carried cost. Everyone understood the equation. Speech was weighted. Association measured. Presence calculated. No order was needed. The lesson was internalized. Provincial societies mirrored Rome. Governors enforced expectations. Local elites complied early. Resistance became theoretical. The absence of examples mattered. There were no martyrs, no stories of defiance, only quiet removals. That silence discouraged imitation. Time reinforced obedience. What was not discussed was not imagined. What was not imagined was not attempted. Rome understood this deeply. Power was psychological before it was physical. Power operated through expectation. Expectation shaped behavior. Behavior stabilized the state. This stability extended across generations. Children inherited caution. They absorbed limits before learning language. They grew into the system without friction. By adulthood, obedience felt normal. Alternatives felt abstract. The erased individuals never returned symbolically. No rehabilitation occurred. No acknowledgement followed. The state did not forgive. It forgot. Forgetting was more final. Records hardened over time. Stone outlived flesh. Documents outlived memory.